Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra book, and we have done over 60 videos, subhanAllah, on Nietzsche. And so let us continue. We are on a section that is titled On the Vision and the Riddle. Let's begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. When it got abroad among the sailors that Zarathustra was on board, for another man from the blessed isles had embarked with him, there was much curiosity and anticipation. But Zarathustra remained silent for 2 days, and was cold and deaf from sadness, and answered neither glances nor questions. Answering glances. That's a great point. Answering glances. We're told to lower our gaze, right? When you don't lower your gaze and someone's looking at you and then you look back like, and then they start to come over, right? So they answered your glance and you answered back. But on the evening of the second day, he opened his ears again, although he still remained silent, for there was much that was strange and dangerous to be heard on this ship, which came from far away and wanted to sail even farther. But Zarathustra was a friend of all who travel far and do not like to live without danger. And, behold, eventually his own tongue was loosened as he listened, and the ice of his heart broke. Then he began to speak to us. The ice of his heart broke. To you, the bold searchers, researchers, and whoever embarks with cunning sails on terrible seas, to you, drunk with riddles, glad of the twilight, whose soul flutes lure astray to every whirlpool. Whose soul flutes lure astray to every whirlpool. So a whirlpool brings you in, right? It sucks you under. So the flute, like, oh, what's that sound? You follow it, and there's a whirlpool, oh, you sucked in. Pointing out the potency of music. Music potency. The piper, if like in the movie Shrek, I forget what number, the one where he has babies. And Rumpelstiltskin, he pays the piper, and it makes the ogres dance, right? So the controllingness, so the ability of music to make you groove, make you move, and get you in a whirlpool is true. There's a lot of metaphors you can read into here, a lot of symbolism, because you do not want to grope along a thread with cowardly hand, and where you can guess, you hate to deduce. To you alone I tell the riddle that I saw, the vision of the loneliest. Not long ago I walked gloomily through the deadly pallor of dusk, gloomy and hard, with lips pressed together. So gloomy. Dusk, gloom. Not only one sun had set for me a path that's ascended defiantly through stones, malicious, lonely, not cheered by herb or shrub. A mountain path crunched under the defiance of my foot. So a mountain path crunched under the defiance of my foot. So he's walking on a place that hasn't been tread as much. So, or he could be in a place where the trail is covered with leaves during autumn. But what I'm getting from this is, you know, the unbeaten path. Because when you beat the path, there's less crunch, right? You've gone off the beaten path into stepping on twigs and everything else, right? Striding silently over the mocking clatter of pebbles, crushing the rock that made it slip. My foot forced its way upward, defying the spirit that drew it downward toward the abyss. The spirit of gravity, my devil and arch enemy. The spirit of gravity. Upward, although he sat on me, half dwarf, half mole, lame, making lame, dripping lead into my ear, laden thoughts into my brain. O Zarathustra, he whispered mockingly, syllable by syllable, you philosopher's stone, you threw yourself up high. but every stone that is thrown must fall. What goes up must come down. O Zarathustra, you philosopher's stone, you sling stone, you star crusher, you threw yourself up so high, but every stone that is thrown must fall, sentenced to yourself and to your own stoning. O Zarathustra, far indeed have you thrown the stone, but it will fall back on yourself. The dwarf fell silent, and that lasted a long time. His silence, however, oppressed me, and such twosomeness is surely more lonesome than being alone. Oh, yes, so that twosomeness, when you're walking next to someone and they're quite silent, you feel more lonely than if you were actually alone, right? I climbed, I dreamed, I thought, but everything oppressed me. I was like one sick, whom his wicked torture makes weary, and who, as he falls asleep, is awakened by a still more wicked dream. But there is something in me that I call courage, that has so far slain my every discouragement. Okay, so courage that has so far slain my every discouragement. So courage, think about that. Discouragement, courage. Something that props you up, something that takes you down. Gravity, put you back down. This courage finally bade me stand still and speak. Dwarf, it is you or I, for courage is the best slayer. Courage which attacks, for in every attack there is playing in brass. Courage which attacks. Sounds like on the offense, right? Man, however, is the most courageous animal. Hence he overcame every animal. Ooh. That's a clever line. Humans being, but again, that classifies us as animals. So I reject being called an animal. See the game I play? We're all just animals, you know. Just give in to your animalistic bestial nature. Hump like bonobos. Whereas we are the people of Adam. So the sons of Adam. We are slaves of Allah. We are differentiated from the animal kingdom. So we're meant to be in a more noble sense. But it is an interesting line here. With playing in brass, he has so far overcome every pain, but human pain is the deepest pain. Ooh. Maybe because of our level of consciousness, you know? But that's a tough one, because how you measure another creature's suffering. What they do to keep their offspring alive. I mean, humans, what they do to their own offspring. Courage also slays dizziness at the edge of abysses. Ooh, so the dizziness. So the abyss, right? Like, wow, this void, this vastness. And someone could be like, oh, I'm feeling like, oh, it's so over me, it's overwhelming. The sublime is overwhelming. But if you're courageous, you're like, whoa, and you got that vision, penetrates into the abyss, and you're like, forward. So I can see where he's coming from. And where does man not stand at the edge of abysses? Is not seeing always seeing abysses? That, excuse me. When you look down into the ocean, before we could get to the bottom, the deeper you go, the darker it gets, so that feels like an abyss. When you stare up at the blue sky, it's a bright abyss, but it's so far away and unending to us, so you're like, wow. And to even if you got on a rocket ship, and you kept going, you know, that's a one-way ticket. You keep going, trying to find the end, you can come back, it's going to be years. We don't have that technology to go all around and come back so fast. In the abyss of your own mind, your inner space, how you can go on in the catacombs of your own psychology, of your own consciousness, and just keep going around, keep going deeper. There's no end to your thought. So, seeing truths, seeking out the abyss in nature and with your inner self, our eyes perceive many different abysses. You see people acting in a debaucherous manner, it can feel like an abyss. Like, look at this. These people are idiots. You see someone just swimming in a pool like Scrooge McDuck with all their gold coins, and you're like, that's just an abyss of greed. So I can see that type of sentence in many ways, as I'm sure you can as well. Courage is the best slayer. Courage slays even pity. That's true. That is true. But pity is the deepest abyss. As deeply as man sees into life, he also sees into suffering. Yes. Because you see a lot like, wow, look at the blooming of this, the birth of that, the volcanoes erupting, right? But suffering, you can perceive that in multiple ways. That's why I like tragedies. Greek tragedy always made me see more about life in myself. Happy stories bore me. When you see a villain, you see like sadness. I'm like, yeah, I see more about my own self. I see more into that abyss of human behavior, the Black Mirror abyss, and I take lessons from it. There's a catharsis there. If someone's just pure happy, you're like, that can help sometimes, but not all the time. So when you want to perceive something on a deep level, you travel down that rabbit hole, you travel down that abyss. Courage, however, is the best slayer. Courage which attacks, which slays even death itself. For it says, was that life? Well then, what's more? Yes, subhanAllah. I mean, in Islam we have that, our brave warriors of jihad. Women who give birth. You know, you go in, I hope we both make it. In such words, however, there is much playing and brass. He that has ears to hear, let him hear. Part 2. Stop, dwarf, I said. It is I or you, but I am the stronger of us two. You do not know my abysmal thought that you could not bear. Then something happened that made me lighter. For the dwarf jumped from my shoulder, being curious, and he crouched on a stone before me. But there was a gateway just where he had stopped. Behold this gateway, dwarf, I continued. It has two faces. Two paths meet here. Not one has yet followed either to its end. This long lane stretches back for an eternity. On the long lane out there, that is another eternity. Ooh. So, two paths. The crossroads. You always see these posts on Twitter X. Which way, Western man? And it has like the two posts. Right? The two paths. They contradict each other. Yeah, they have that deep contrast. These paths, they offend each other face to face. And it is here, at this gateway, that they come together. The name of the gateway is inscribed above. Moment. But whoever would follow one of them, on and on, farther and farther, do you believe, dwarf, that these paths contradict each other eternally? All that is straight lies, the dwarf murmured contemptuously. All truth is crooked, time itself is a circle. Time itself is a circle. Ah! You were non-existent, right? You were not in this realm. You're growing in the womb, you're born. back to a feeble stage, or at least less strong, and then poof, you're gone. You know, here you are, goodbye. Here you are, goodbye. You spirit of gravity, I said angrily, do not make things too easy for yourself. Or shall I let you crouch where you are crouching, lame foot? And it was I that carried you to this height. Behold, I continued this moment. From this gateway moment a long eternal lane leads backwards. Behind us lies an eternity. Must not wherever can walk have walked on this lane before? Must not whatever can happen have happened? Have been done, have passed by before? And if everything has been there before, what do you think, dwarf, of this moment? Must not this gateway too have been there before? And are not all things knotted together so firmly that this moment draws after it all that is to come? That sounds like that Buddhistic knot. Buddhists have this knot thing, this knot pattern. I don't know if you've seen it. Therefore itself too, for whatever can walk in this long lane out there too, it must walk once more. And this slow spider, which crawls in the moonlight, and this moonlight itself, and I, and you, in the gateway, whispering together, whispering of eternal things, must not all of us have been there before? And return and walk in that other lane, out there, before us, in this long, dreadful lane? Must we not eternally return? Thus I spoke more and more softly, for I was afraid of my own thoughts, and the thoughts behind my thoughts. Thoughts behind my thoughts. That's the truth, ain't it? Then suddenly I heard a dog howl nearby. Had I ever heard a dog howl like this? My thoughts raced back, yes, when I was a child, in the most distant childhood. Then I heard a dog howl like this, and I saw him too, bristling, his head's up, trembling in the stillest midnight, when even dogs believe in ghosts, and I took pity, for just then the full moon, silent as death, passed over the house. Just then it stood still, a round glow, still on the flat roof, as if on another's property. That was why the dog was terrified, for dogs believe in thieves and ghosts. Well, they have to, that's their job. They were fed to keep an ever watchful eye, and as they watch, they see phantoms of their own mind, and shadow plays on their psyche. And when I heard such howling again, I took pity again. Where was this dwarf gone now? In the gateway? And the spider? And all of the whispering? Was I dreaming then? Was I waking up? Among wild cliffs I stood suddenly alone, bleak in the bleakest moonlight. But there lay a man, and there the dog, jumping, bristling, winning. Now he saw me coming. Then he howled again. He cried, had I ever heard a dog cry like this for help? And verily, what I saw, I had never seen the like. A young shepherd I saw, writhing, gagging in spasms, his face distorted, and heavy black snake hung around out of his mouth. Had I ever seen so much nausea and pale dread on the face? He seems to have been asleep when the snake crawled into his throat, and there bit itself fast. My hand tore at the snake, and tore in vain. It did not tear the snake out of his throat. Then it cried out of me, bite, bite, its head off, bite. Thus it cried out of me, my dread, my hatred, my nausea, my pity, all that is good and wicked in me cried out of me with a single cry. You bold ones who surround me, you searchers, researchers, and whoever among you has embarked with cunning sails on unexplored seas. See, I like this part here because searchers, like when you're like, if you actually are a lover of knowledge and truth and wisdoms and witticisms, information, you never really stop and you keep going. You keep looking. Some people hate me for that. You know, why do you read this? Why do you read that? Why do you talk about this? Why do you talk about that? But our minds, like setting sail off into the horizon of what we're gonna learn and think about and see the thoughts behind our own thoughts. It's really wonderful. Cunning sails. The sail helps you navigate it. So as you're steering the ship, you know, the wind's coming, right? Trying to blow you off course. You have an objective where you're gonna go, but you have to be steady and you're smart. You know how to maneuver. So when you're surfing information, surfing the web, right? When you are reading, searching the sea of knowledge, you know, you begin to become stronger. And so when he talks about you searchers, your researchers, he's talking about this spirit of truth seekers, knowledge seekers, keepers of the keys of knowledge, people who impart knowledge, people who share and don't want to just be the couch potato, don't want to just be the automaton, but they want to live and breathe and inspire. Right? So he's talking to those kinds of people. You who are glad of riddles. The riddles are fun. I have a riddle book. They are fun, and I've posted some on the community tab. Guess me this riddle that I saw. Interpret me the vision of the loneliest. For it was a vision and foreseeing. What did I see then in a parable? And who is it? Who must yet come on one day? Who is the shepherd into whose throat the snake crawled thus? Who is the man into whose throat all that is heaviest and blackest with crawl thus? The shepherd, however, bit as my cry counselled him. He bit with a good bite. Far away he spewed the head of the snake, and he jumped up. No longer shepherd, no longer human. One changed, radiant, laughing. Never yet on earth has a human being laughed as he laughed. Oh, my brothers, I heard a laughter that was no human laughter. And now a thirst gnaws at me. A long human laughter, and now a thirst gnaws at me. A long human laughter that never grows still. My longing for this laughter gnaws at me. Oh, how do I bear to go on living? And how could I bear to die now? Thus spoke Zarathustra. That's a paradox right there. How do I go on? How could I bear to die now? But how could I die now? This is a very potent line. How do I bear to go on living, and how could I bear to die now? In Islam, I've shared the hadith, we're not supposed to long for death. And if you've ever been someone who struggled with mental health and you have very deep thoughts about life and purpose, where you are, you might be like, you know what? I want relief from this world. I don't want to be here anymore. But then you look at the people whom you love and you're like, I have to stick around to protect them. And then when you do feel sick, and you're like, oh, I don't want to be sick. I want to go to the doctor. Maybe they'll find a cure. And you fight to live. This paradox of the human being, where I don't want to be here anymore. I don't like life. But then when you're ill, you're nothing. But like you have this, you have this urge to keep on fighting, to keep holding on, to not just give in. Very fascinating to think about. Okay, now this one is titled On Involuntary Bliss. With such riddles and bitterness in his heart, Zarathustra crossed the sea. But when he was 4 days away from the blessed isles and from his friends, he had overcome all his pain, triumphant with firm feet. He stood on his destiny again, and then Zarathustra spoke thus to his jubilant conscience. I am alone again, and I want to be so, alone with the pure sky and open sea. That's a sort of resetting, and you should try it. I do like being by the ocean, and I do like it when there's clouds. The vastness is very soothing. When you're pinned in is, I think, when you start to go insane. Again, it is afternoon around me. It was in the afternoon that I once found my friends for the first time. It was afternoon the second time, too, at the hour when all light grows quieter. For whatever of happiness is still on its way between heavens and earth now seeks shelter and bright soul. It is from happiness that all light has grown quieter. O afternoon of my life, once my happiness too, descended to the valley to seek shelter, and found those open, hospitable souls. O afternoon of my life, what have I not given up to have one single thing? This living plantation of my thoughts. Ooh, living plantation of my thoughts, and this morning light of my highest hope. Companions, the Creator once thought, and children of his hope, and behold, it turned out that he could not find them, unless he first created them himself. Thus I am in the middle of my work, going to my children, and returning from them, for his children's sake. Zarathustra must perfect himself, for from the depths of one's love, only one's child and work, and where there is great love of oneself, it is the sign of pregnancy. Thus I found it to be. My children are still verdant in their first spring, standing close together and shaken by the same winds, the trees of my garden and my best soil. And verily, where such trees stand together, there are blessed isles. But one day, I want to dig them up and place each by itself, so it may learn solitude and defiance and caution. So it may learn solitude, defiance, and caution. Solitude, defiance, caution. So we used to have cautionary tales. I really enjoy cautionary tales. Some people, they only put on Disney type of films, even though, ironically, there's some cautions in Disney. But what I mean by Disney-ish is they don't really tell their children the gruesome stuff of the world. You protect their innocence, but they coddle them too much to where they don't have any survival techniques. And I think with the human being, you have to refresh them and say, no, if someone has a puppy in their car, they snatch you away. You don't keep them in perpetual fear, but you teach them to have discernment. When it comes to defiance, this is where it's like, if an oppressive bully comes and says, you know, I get to go in your locker room just because I identify as a woman, and you're like, no, you're staying out of this space. Get out of here. Or someone is saying, you know, I'm going to force myself upon you, and like their actions are showing they're going to overtake you. You fight back in defiance. You know, oh, if you don't stop talking about the war in Palestine, we will deplatform you, and you keep talking. You keep being bold and brave. When you become a mom, you'll learn solitude. Because a lot of women think they have girlfriends, but they don't. Girlfriends as in friends that are girls. Not lesbianism, not bisexualism. I mean as in friends that are girls, right? I had mentioned in the past, you know, I have about 5 friends who I would consider that. Now I would consider that less. Who would I really depend on? Who checks in on me? And there was a red pill Muslim guy who made fun of me for this. But you can see how someone is a deep ignoramus, because when a woman has a baby, she learns that she is rather alone. And I've shared screenshots and talked where you can and spoken about where women mention how motherhood is a lonely road. They're isolated, right? Because if you're a nursing mom, breastfeeding mom, and you have other children, it's very hard, and that's why they started to do mom groups. That's the whole reason why mom groups started popping up, is so that women wouldn't be alone, right? They say, it takes a village, it takes a community, don't be... Why? Because women were alone, and it takes a lot of work. And so I argue that when you become a mom, you learn solitude and you learn who your real friends are, and you learn what actually a friend is. But you have to know how to have solitude. You have to know how to deal with that. Solitary confinement makes others go crazy, but there's a dynamicism of being an extrovert and an introvert and being able to navigate between the two. To where if you are in a position where you are in solitude, you learn to refresh, rejuvenate, and really level up your mind. And solitude can be a wonderful thing when you know how to deal with it, when you know how to make it work for you. This is why I read a lot. You know, you're keeping the brain stimulated, not through gossip channels, not through intoxicants. When you can have sober solitude and it doesn't make you crumble, then I think you've leveled up. So he talks about placing these trees, digging them up, and placing them by themselves so they can learn solitude. This is important. Now, if you've ever seen some trees, they you know, they look a little sad there when they're like young and the wind is blowing them about. When you see another tree that's a tiny tot growing next to the bigger trees, they have some support, right? But the wind doesn't batter them as hard because the other trees shelter them from the roughness of the wind. And so him using these tree examples, and then he also mentioned shaken by the same winds, you see how like, interesting. Because the first trees that get planted, they're so little teeny tiny, they have to kind of go with the wind, and that's why people put posts and then they tie the trees so they don't get beat up by the wind. Because some trees, when they bloom, they have heavy little frail branches and they need support. And so they can break real easy when they're little saplings. They don't do well in solitude, whereas redwood trees, they kind of cluster bloom around each other and then they go straight up. And you're like, wow, they do just fine. And then they actually reproduce in a very unique fashion. And so think about how you can learn to have moments of solitude. It's a necessary survival skill. Gnarled and bent, and with supple hardness, it shall then stand by the sea, a living lighthouse of invincible life. Where the storms plunge down into the sea, and the mountain stretches out its trunk for water, there everyone shall once have his day, and night watches for his testing and knowledge. He shall be known and tested, whether he is of my kind and kin, whether he is the master of a long will. So, he shall be tested in Islam. Do you think you will not be tested? Every person will be tested in Islam, right? Prophet Job was tested. Every prophet and messenger was tested in some way. Okay? And we will be tested. So, there's going to be suffering no matter what. Not every test is easy. Taciturn even when he speaks, and yielding so that in giving he receives, so that he may one day become my companion, and a fellow creator and fellow celebrant of Zarathustra, one who writes my will on my tablets to contribute to the greater perfection of all things. And for his sake, and for the sake of those like him, I must perfect myself. Therefore I now evade my happiness, and offer myself to all unhappiness for my final testing and knowledge. Final testing, so evading happiness, and then dealing with unhappiness. So when you're sober, you confront unhappiness head on. This is something to think about. When you're using intoxicants, you're avoiding unhappiness, and you're artificially boosting this happiness. And when you have the high and then you go down low, the withdrawal, you're like, oh, this wasn't worth it. Think about alcohol. You're shy, And all of a sudden you start drinking, you loosen it up, and you're like, "Oh, this is great. Let me drink more and more." And then there's that peak buzz, and then there's the almost retardation that happens with alcohol, the dizziness, the blacking out, the puking, and then the next day, extreme hangover, how sick you feel. And then they, "Oh, I gotta drink, so the best way to get over your hangover is to drink more. I'm sad. I gotta cope with intoxicants." And then you're not really processing the unhappiness and confronting what it is. And when he talks about offering himself to all unhappiness, when Islam tells us, when our religion tells us to not use intoxicants, I have mentioned that Muslims are stronger because we don't seek those out. Because we don't run away from our pain. We have to confront it head on. And that's how you get more knowledge, and by the permission of Allah, and where you and go through higher levels of testing. The atheist says, "No, man, psychedelics. You know, smoke a blunt, smoke a cigarette, take a Percocet, smoke some weed, do all this stuff. All of it. Just keep on piling on layer after layer after layer, then drink a Red Bull." You know, you would be surprised how indulgent the atheists are, and especially some Christians as well, with their alcohol. Especially the women who drink wine. Then they pop pills. You're like, wow. They don't know how to offer themselves to unhappiness. And verily, it was time for me to leave, and the wanderer's shadow, and the longest boredom, and the stillest hour they all urged me. It's high time. The wind blew through my keyhole and said, "Come cunningly." The door flew open and said to me, "Go." But I lay there, chained to the love for my children. Desire set the snare for me, the desire for love, that I might become my children's prey and lose myself to them. Desire, this means to me to have lost myself. I have you, my children, in this experience. Everything shall be security and nothing desire. But, brooding, the sun of my love lay on me. Zarathustra was cooking in his own juice. Then shadows and doubts flew over me. I yearned for frost and winter. Oh, that frost and winter might make me crack and crunch again. I sighed. The icy mist rose from me. My past burst its tombs. Many a pain that had been buried alive awoke, having merely slept hidden in burial shrouds. That is a serious line right there. Serious business. My past burst its tombs. When you put it to rest, lay it to rest. You know, your history, you're like, okay, I'm gonna bury the tomb. Tomb sounds more of like something that is not meant to be reopened again. Not meant to be visited. It's buried. And closed. So bursting open is like, whoops. Buried alive. Pain that had been buried alive. So burying pain that is still active. Like, it was kicking and screaming, this agony you had, you put it there, you buried it and put it in a tomb, and you dealt with it. And now it's, bam, right back again. That it didn't actually die and go away. It just went to sleep and was hidden, but now it's back again. Thus everything called out to me in sign, "It's time," but I did not hear, until at last my abyss stirred and my thought bit me. Alas, abysmal thought that is my thought. When shall I find the strength to hear you burrowing without trembling any more? My heart pounds to my very throat whenever I hear you burrowing. Even your silence wants to choke me, you who are so abysmally silent. As yet, I have never dared to summon you. It was enough that I carried you with me. As yet, I have not been strong enough for the final overbearing, prankish bearing of the lion. Your gravity was always terrible enough for me. But one day I shall yet find the strength of the lion's voice to summon you. So here, the final overbearing, so to overcome that, bear down on it, and the bearing of the lion, when if you were pounced on by the lion, like, oh, I can't get out. When you look at how a lion goes on a wildebeest, brings it down, the wildebeest by its throat, it's very difficult. So when the gravity pushes us down, like when you're depressed, the gravity is pushing on your chest, and you're like, the push to breathe is even hard. And so when you're like, no, like you're that lion's voice, that roar, you're pushing against that gravitational oppression, and of both real and spiritual sense. And once I have overcome myself that far, then I also want to overcome myself in what is still greater, and a victory shall seal my perfection. Meanwhile, I still drift on uncertain seas. Smooth tongue, accident flatters me, forward and backward I look. I still see no end. As yet the hour of my final struggle has not come to me, or is it coming just now? Verily, with treacherous beauty see and life look at me, O afternoon of my life, O happiness before evening, O haven on the high seas, O peace in uncertainty, how I mistrust all of you. Verily, I am mistrustful of your treacherous beauty. I am like the lover who mistrusts the all too velvet smile. Yeah. Yeah. That charisma, that devilish grin, like, I mentioned many times about that LinkedIn corporate smile, like, like, Umbridge in Harry Potter was a good example. Like, she's always smiling, like, and you're like, something ain't right about you. You know, people who got that fake corporate smile. Men who are very charismatic, and they're really just Luciferians. Then you have Jezebels who they smile to seduct and then to like just rob you blind. So yes, watch out for that velvet smile. As he pushes his most beloved before him, tender even in his hardness. Remember, a good smile is a form of charity. Remember the hadith? As he pushes his most beloved before him, tender even in his hardness, and jealous, thus I push this blessed hour before me. Away with you, blessed hour, with your bliss came to me against my will. Willing to suffer my deepest pain, I stand here. You came at the wrong time. Away with you, blessed hour, rather seek shelter there, with my children, hurry, and bless them before evening with my happiness. There evening approaches, even now. The sun sinks, gone, my happiness. Thus spoke Zarathustra, and he waited for his unhappiness the entire night. But he waited in vain. The night remained bright and still, and happiness itself came closer and closer to him. Toward morning, however, Zarathustra laughed in his heart and said mockingly, Happiness runs after me. That is because I do not run after women, for happiness is women. That's funny. Happiness is a woman. Companionship? The women come to him. So he doesn't chase women. Women come to him. So he sees himself as the prize. Mashallah, what a great section. Next section is titled Before Sunrise. We'll say that for next time, but this was very rich. My past bursts its tombs. I mean, subhanAllah, very introspective. Embarking with cunning sails on unexplored seas. Thoughts behind my thoughts. The dwarf episode, the spirit of gravity. Twosomeness is surely more lonesome than being alone. The crossroads. Great section. Let me know what you liked. If you'd like to support my work, you can do so by going to www.subscribestar.com/Milahan Archive. Hope to see you there. Please like, comment, and subscribe.